See, broadcasting now. Let everyone come into the webinar. Welcome to Powerhouse Arena's virtual events. My name is Chris. I'm the events coordinator. And tonight we're hosting the launch for Anthropica by David Hollander. He'll be in conversation with Rick Moody. You can buy the book at powerhousebookstores.com. The link is in the event page, and I'll repost it in the chat right now. Everyone who buys the book will receive a signed book plate in the mail, and there is also a raffle tonight for some goodies, so stay tuned. If you have any questions, you can use the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen, and David will take your questions at the end of the event. And I will hand it over now to Brian from Animal Riot Press, who will introduce David and fill you in about the raffle. Thanks.
All right, great. So everyone bear with me as I endeavor into the most contrived but necessary moment of the launch. This will be the longest speech I give, I promise. So yeah, thanks Chris for the wonderful introduction. We really appreciate you at Powerhouse and for hosting this night for us, particularly in doing your part to keep the community together during times when it seems like the universe is trying its best to keep us apart. Animal Riot was founded on the principle of community, and we feel infinitely fortunate despite the current dystopian drawbacks for the things that enable us to continue meeting and interacting and sharing in the literary spirit. The Animal Riot reading series started just about 6 years ago, nearly to the day. I think it was on the 15th, if I'm not mistaken, of 2014. So I guess, you know, the universe has something in store for us tonight. Though I wasn't a co-founder of the series, I've been known to as its mascot, namely the person who marches into the back and orders the drunk and disorderly to shut the hell up so everyone can hear the readers. But then our, you know, I don't know, maybe I'll call him our first co-founder, Jonathan Kay, entered the picture. One of my best friends growing up. You know, I lived with him in Seattle for a couple of years in our in our strapping young 20s. And he suggested that, you know, quite casually that we start a press. I immediately and unilaterally hired Katie Rainey, without whom we would be merely but a few of Shakespeare's 1,000 monkeys banging on a typewriter. And we've also received enormous help from a lot of friends. I wish I could list them all tonight, but, you know, unfortunately, I'm just going to go with Devin Kelly, who's a co-founder of the reading series, Annie Krabenschmidt, who's, you know, most likely a soon-to-be author for Animal Riot, who's got a wonderful book in the works, and Dylan Thomas, who's offered his services in the magnanimous way that anyone wanting to learn about the now artisan publishing business will. In thinking of a name for our press, it only made sense that we would be an extension of the reading series. If not for the very fact of the burgeoning community we created in the literary excellence and kindred spirits it drew to its light like the dumb flies we are compared to the vast and indifferent cosmos. At least that's how David would like to think of it. Wouldn't you, David? Yes, yes, you would. David Hollander, me and Katie's thesis advisor, mentor, but most of all, you know, just one of the best friends we've ever had. Among other things I was fortunate enough to experience. One was to share the spotlight on that night 6 years ago, the first Animal Riot reading, which I remember I did an awful job. I think it was like the first or second reading I'd ever done. And then you went up after me, David. I think I was first, and you went up after me, and it was just like, I was like, wow, this is, I should quit. Yeah, so that was when the first Animal Riot readers stepped up to the stage and spoke to a crowd leaning earnestly into our prose that we'd labored over for hours upon hours, if only to watch those very people lean in so very earnestly. Okay, so I promise after this, I'm not going to say much because I know David wouldn't appreciate me waxing poetic about him. He's more of the pyrotechnic, sardonic, you know, let's consider death from all 360 angles type. So, and now Rick as well, I've just learned, is very similar. So things should run very smoothly if somewhat sepulchrally and, nihilistically from here. On paper, David might seem like a real asshole, like I just said. So it's a good thing he wrote a book, I suppose. But in reality, he's perhaps the most beloved professor in the history of Sarah Lawrence College, and I say that with all sincerity, and I actually think that's probably true. I've never met one person on campus who hasn't said he's not his favorite professor. He sacrificed his livelihood for others. He gives more of his time to writers that will only see modest success than most literary agents do their breadwinningest authors. No one deserves this more than him, and better yet, no book deserves this more than his book. We decided to publish Anthropica before David did. He pretty much begged us not to, or like not, he wouldn't even let us read it. So we had to prize the post-nihilistic catechism from his cold robotic hands, but I couldn't be happier for the effort. So despite these incredibly contrived words, tonight is about sitting back and enjoying David's achievement. We're utterly grateful to have David's very own mentor, Rick Moody, here for the occasion, whom I'm just meeting for the first time. All of us actually are. On that note, let's have a raffle, a conversation, and some fun. Chris just told me to explain the raffle. I can't explain the raffle, but we're going to have one. So everyone get in on the raffle. I don't know, Chris, if you want to say a little bit more about the raffle. I know nothing about the raffle, but I'll just end by saying the beginning portion by saying thank you everyone for coming, and let's get this thing started. Chris, do you want to say something about the raffle at all, or should we just proceed? Let's just go. There's a raffle, everyone. Just buy a ticket, whatever happens, let's do it. So I'm going to mute my face and my audio now and hand it over to you guys. And we're going to have a reading now, correct?
Yes, that is correct. And thank you, Brian. Sometimes when people are saying nice things about me, I go into what I call robot mode because I feel like I don't want to get emotional in front of people. But I'm just so grateful to Brian and Katie for making me give them my book, and just really happy to be doing this event tonight because, releasing this novel that I worked on for so long and had sort of lost all hope of publishing during a global pandemic has in some ways prevented me from having the experience I've sort of hoped for so long, being able to connect with readers after so many years of trying to put out a book. So this event and having Rick here with me makes it feel a little bit more real. And so I'm just grateful for everyone, and for whoever is out there in the cyber void. Thank you for coming. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a reading from the book. And I'm going to read a section that revolves around one of the book's primary characters, whose name is Laszlo Katastrofa. He's a Hungarian. He believes human beings are a stain on God's otherwise perfect universe, and he is seeking to eradicate the species. He hasn't had very good ideas on how to do that, but over the course of the novel, he's getting better ideas. But some of the chapters in the novel show some of the major players when they were younger, when they were children. And the section I'm going to read shows you Laszlo in Hungary as a 9-year-old boy. It is chapter 7, and now I will put on my reading glasses. So. At a very early age, the boy had discovered the problem of causal determinism and had renounced any lingering affection for the grim ontology through which he toiled. He had been standing on the bridge that led from his family's farmstead on the outskirts of Kessel, Hungary, to the town itself some 3 miles distant. These were hard times for his family, who in many respects lived as if it were 1878, not 1978. They did not, for instance, own an automobile. The boy had never seen a television. One night a week, he was permitted to listen to the live music broadcasts on Hungarian radio. His father thought that electricity had a whiff of evil about it, and so wandered the farmhouse after dark, holding aloft a candelabra and emptying the mousetraps of their bloodless and twisted quarry. There were farmers, but their profit margins were so narrow that it was often the case that either there was food to eat or there was money to continue producing food to eat, a harsh irony that had not failed to register on the boy. Oftentimes, he would work long days beside his father before devouring a small meal of barley soup and sugar beets. He would lie awake at night on his straw mattress with his belly twisted in hunger and a cold draft hissing through the seams of a house built some 100 years earlier to prolong the brutish and short lives of peasants during the monarchy. If the house had a soul, it was a masochistic soul that savored every pain and lived only to spite the bitter earth that was eager to swallow it whole. Lately, the boy's sleep had been frequently interrupted by his infant sister's shrill bleating, though the baby had been dead for many months. Maybe the house was now haunted by her tiny ghost, or maybe the cries ascended from the boy's dreams, or maybe the rats had again overtaken the barn to nibble on the soft ankle flesh of adolescent sheep. His father often lamented that they had been better off under Kadar, but the boy only understood the political realities of his nation vaguely and scantwise. They were on their own, he knew, and that did not seem very good, but it didn't exactly require an enormous feat of the imagination to conceive of something far, far worse. The bridge was maybe 30 meters across and constructed of wide plank cottonwood, and it spanned the narrowest part of the river, which in midsummer withered to a mere trickle, but right now, in the late fall, ran clear and fast. Mulberry trees provided shade at either end of the bridge, but at the center of the span, where he now stood, the sunlight was warm and prickly and tasted vaguely of copper. He clutched a tangle of mulberry leaves in his left fist, releasing them over the railing one at a time to watch the clumsy spiraling descent enter suddenly into a controlled rush downstream. The stream's clarity was such that this change in speed and bearing was the only indication that the leaves had in fact touched down. There was a bend in the waterway about 20 yards beyond the bridge, and he tried to determine whether any given leaf would round that bend and remain adrift or be ensnared by the eddy of leaves and other debris accumulating there at the elbow. He was running maybe a 75% success rate. Roughly 2 of every 3 leaves undertook easily extrapolated routes, but the outlying cases, which neither hugged the interior tight nor rushed clearly towards safety, challenged the boy's powers of intuition in a way that made his entire body tingle. He felt in some strange, almost religious way that his guessing must have some effect on the outcome. When he was right, it was because he made it happen the way he guessed, and when he was wrong, well, he must not have been concentrating hard enough. He was a strange boy, or so his father often said, after hours from within the wicked glow of the candelabra, musing quietly aloud as if he, the boy, were incapable of understanding human language. The mulberries grew crookedly from the banks, and they traced an image for the boy of the old arthritic sheepdog they'd put down not 3 weeks earlier. The blast of his father's shotgun had resounded out across the steppes to make its way around the earth, and when his father returned to the house, the boy thought that his father had perhaps been crying, which was no more unprecedented on planet Earth than teleportation or the resurrection of the dead. His father had not cried even when his baby girl had finally perished with a fever so intense that hours after death, the body still emanated warmth. They buried her out behind the 2 rusted and retired horse plows. They did have motorized farm equipment, though his father had apparently resisted it for many long, unreasonable years, where the earth was softer and where they could embed the little molar-shaped stone etched with her name and the dates and the blessing. The boy himself would dig the hole for the dog, which had been named Kutia, not 15 meters from that stone. He too had loved the dog in a way that he had not loved the baby, because the baby ought to have been stillborn, so said the doctor, and there was never any hope for her, and both he and his father kept their distance and allowed mother to revel in her grief unfettered by theirs, whereas the boy had often curled up on the kitchen stone floor and told Kutia adventure stories of his imagined life as a world traveler and protector of the meek, and he'd made of that dog a friend, a companion. The boy was supposed to be on his way to town right now for flour and sugar and coffee, but the leaves, They were a problem he could not surrender. He dropped another. It was an easy one, bearing hard left and toward the clear water. A question posed itself. Was it already decided whether or not the next leaf, the one still clutched in his fist, would safely clear the bend? Or whether or not he would drop the next leaf at all? In the time it took to blink, an explosion of thoughts left bright shrapnel throbbing in his skull. Had his sister asked to die? No, she'd been taken. Had he asked to be born? No, he'd been birthed, and then the world had gone to work on him. Certain lessons were received. A hand on a stove taught hot, a slap on a wrist taught no, a dark closet taught do not test us. He was becoming something new at every moment, but it had nothing to do with him. If all the inputs had been different, if grabbing a meringue from a countertop had resulted in laughter rather than punishment, if crying in his room had been met with consolation rather than abuse, if his father were motivated by pleasure rather than fear, then the manipulated object, in this case him, would be different too. But wait, if this were true of him, then it was also true of the inputs one level up. His father's suspiciousness, his mother's stoicism and quiet grief, his sister's tortured wailing, these too were the products of inputs that were received like it or not. The infinite cascade implied in this reasoning occurred instantaneously. No one chose to be the way they were. He stood on the bridge and he held leaves in his sweaty fist, and the light flowed around him like a second and more sublime river, and the breeze tousled his dark hair. He had not chosen this. The inputs led here. There were only inputs. They went on and on and on. He thought of Kutia leaping through a pigsty with an absurd and unfounded joy that had roused a boom of laughter from his father's enormous lungs. This tableau and all of its intricacies, the tusk of spittle hanging from Kutia's jaws, the black shadow of the feed trough, the iron weather vane atop the barn pointing northward, one enormous sow raising her snout and growling, the dust kicked up into a funnel as if Kutia were in the business of raising demons. This entire collection of inputs arrived to his small brain because it had to. The world was encoded, but we could never know the code. Everything was finished before the fact. A bead of sweat achieved critical mass and broke like a ball bearing down the boy's temple and onto his cheek. He blinked. But so if it was true that his decision to play the game with the leaves, and naturally his decision to now think about the decision to play the game with the leaves, and so on ad infinitum, had been determined by a massive, innumerable collection of past inputs, and if those inputs had been similarly rendered necessary by those further past, then the boy wondered, how was it true that he was somebody? He was 9 years old, and all at once, the world became impregnable to his will. He was not a free-roaming creature. He was a ball on a track, and the track would lead wherever it was always going to lead, regardless or because of the fact of his so-called existence. Whatever was going to happen would happen. If God was light, then this new revelation was the air through which God moved. The feeling he had on the cusp of every decision, the tingle of what he had always thought of as free will, was itself absorbed into the larger substructure of a universe totally determined by first conditions. So maybe he would jump from the bridge? Just 10 minutes earlier, the thought would have been unthinkable, and yet from this new position, he realized, among countless other realizations percolating liquid-like through his skull, that every thought was unthinkable right up until the moment it was destined to be thought, so that the boy on the bridge, asking the question, will I jump from this bridge, was always as inevitable as the boy jumping or not jumping from the bridge had been or now was, regardless of how likely or unlikely either eventuality might seem from a purely objective standpoint, which of course was not something possible, objectivity, For humans who had no greater access to the necessary course the universe would take than a squirrel or a chicken did. A tiny, fast receding part of himself was tempted to believe that jumping would somehow release him from the causal chain, as if the universe had decided he should not jump and he might spite its hubris. But no, if jumping was in the cards, he would jump. He squeezed the remaining mulberry leaves in his fist, and he felt their cell walls crack and ooze chlorophyll into his dark palm. He opened his fist, and a few shreds fell to the bridge planks, while others remained affixed to his moist skin. He lifted a knee to the railing and pulled himself up and sat on his ass on the cold, dry beam with his legs swinging out and back above the river. Clouds fanned out high above the steps, shaped like radio waves. He listened hard for their music, but nothing came. If he was going to jump, he would. Nothing could stop it, and nothing could make it happen. Their farm was failing. Their bellies were empty. His sister's tiny body was rotting in the earth. Kutya's favorite toy, a ball made of old kitchen rags and bound tight with tape, remained lodged beneath the pine boards at the threshold to the barn, and it would remain there until somebody or something moved it. He and his father and his mother would all die too, and the moment of each of these deaths was prearranged by what he couldn't call God anymore, because God was that which intervenes, and now he needed a new word, something for that which made intervention impossible. He put his feet down on the several inches of planking that protruded beyond the railing. It was maybe 25 or 30 feet down. The water was crystal clear and, he imagined, very cold. It didn't seem like a fall that could kill a person. Pebbles along the bottom gleamed, each one intricately streaked with a pattern unique to itself. The stones were arranged exactly how they had to be. He thought, now is when I jump. His arms extended out along the railing and his outstretched fingers dug in beneath the board. The universe itself had a shelf life that was also predetermined. It would burn out. How did he know this? He was only 9 years old, but he knew it. Now is when I jump, he said aloud. He gripped the railing. He counted to 3. He had only held his baby sister once, and she had curled into him, sucking a thumb no bigger than a raisin. She was released now from the cold machinery of space and time. He leaned forward in his cage. He counted again to 3. The wind, the sun, the sublime whisper of the running stream. Now is when I jump.
I am very glad you chose that one, David, because I think that was the first section I ever read of Anthropica. So we're back again to where we started. Thank you for that. That is one of my favorite parts of the book. The old question of determinism. Maybe that will be some fodder for the conversation we're about to have between Rick and David. One note I'm going to make is that the raffle does not require purchasing any tickets. So no one fret. So now it's my turn to introduce Rick. Thank you for coming today, Rick. We're really excited. We're gonna have a conversation between Rick and David. I don't know what they're gonna say. They don't know what they're gonna say. Maybe they have some idea. It's gonna be really exciting. Feel free to make comments in the comment bar, and maybe we'll choose a question. Who knows? But let me introduce Rick real quick. It'll be about 1,000% longer than you would like. But Rick Moody was born in New York City and attended Brown and Columbia universities. He is the author of many highly regarded books. That is my words. Those are my words, not his. And among too many awards and achievements to list here, Moody is the recipient of the Addison Metcalf and is a Guggenheim Fellow. He also co-founded the Young Lions Book Award at the New York Public Library. He has taught at the State University of New York at Purchase, the Bennington College Writing Seminars, the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, the New York Writers Institute, and the New School for Social Research, and he lives in Brooklyn, New York. And just to note that Rick Moody is, I don't know, David, is it honest to say that he's your first guiding light into postmodern fiction or what have you? You know, is he your, okay.
He is my, I would say, mentor in the truest
mentor,
sense of the word. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I was dancing around that word, you know, I don't know. But yeah, so the last thing I'll say is that Rick is wearing the exact same Mets hat that my dad is currently wearing downstairs. If you're watching this, Dad, hi. But yeah, I'm again going to mute my hairy face and let you guys talk. So
thank you, Brian.
Yep.
Hey.
Hey, Rick.
I feel that this is dumb and you and I should get to go sit somewhere and chat for a while, you know?
Yeah, that would be very nice, wouldn't it? There's something so strange about this.
Yeah, it's weird. Well, that was a really incredibly great reading, just a great reading, a beautiful passage to read. And I think it's a keeper and you should keep reading it because it's beautiful and effective. But when we were chatting about things we might talk about, you said to me that the book started from a conceptual place. And I believe that you said that the conceptual place had to do with sort of runaway consumption. But this passage is so breathtaking and seems so central in some way. I'm wondering how it relates to the conceptual apparatus for you, and or if when you encountered Laszlo's childhood, you recognized that it too had some sort of centermost role to play in how the book came to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I know that when I wrote that chapter, which was one of the chapters that I sort of wrote in one sitting, I kind of knew that I had done something good. And I think what had happened was that the rhythm of the book is I'm trying to toggle back and forth between a kind of like absurdism and something that is much more humanistic and has real compassion. And the Laszlo that you're encountering in the present tense of the book is, in some ways, it would be easy to sort of almost mock for his weird like removal from his own actions. And I think I wanted to create a backdrop in which that the sort of absurdist Laszlo that you see in the unfolding present of the book would be given this other kind of depth. Because in the present, well before this passage, Laszlo is always saying, whatever was always going to happen will happen. And, you know, it seems sort of like a callous throwaway kind of thing he says, but I think I was trying to give it this sort of depth through this chapter. And then it really changed his character for me after I had written that chapter. And I felt like now I was taking him seriously in a new way.
As you know, it's sort of a kind of a fact that orbits around this book that it took so long, you know, and that you know, that you had to sort of sit through what any writer would consider a kind of painful interval to get to publication and to see this thing to its you know, happy conclusion. And I'm wondering if from where you're sitting now, if all the time that had to elapse, you know, has a role to play in how you think of the book now, or if it affected the sort of ultimate phase of the composition. What was the effect of all that time?
You know, it's funny, on publication day, which was a little over a week ago, I was surprised to find myself, I felt like really emotional. And I feel like I have been carrying around a weight for a really long time of just this perception of myself as really as a failure, you know, trying to, so my first book came out 20 years ago and I've written 4 or 5 or 6 books between that book and this book, depending on how you calculate. And, you know, there were times where I thought I would just give up and I quit writing forever, but then I would come back to it and I'd come back to it. And I think at the time I had failed to find a big publisher for Anthropica, and I sort of shelved it. I think I really had given up. Between then and when Katie asked me for this book and I finally relented 2 or 3 years later, I had not written a word. And it was the longest period I'd ever gone probably without writing. And I don't know if I would have come back to it. So in a way, publishing it feels like it has saved me from total surrender. And that's, you know, pretty serious stuff, because this was obviously something I've thrown myself into for a long time. I don't know if that's really an answer to the question you asked, but yeah, is it?
Here's another way to put it. So Laszlo would say that you had to fail at all those manuscripts in order that this manuscript would happen. So if we take a determinist view of your career, you had to do all that. You know,
Yeah.
Can you look at the book now and see, you know, those husks of other material as, you know, necessary mulch for this thing to have the kind of cast that it has?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think what happened after I published LIE all those years ago, which for people who don't know, that book was dedicated to you because you had meant so much to me. But after I published that book and started to become aware that I was a writer now and there was an audience for my books, I started writing in a way where I was sort of out to prove with every sentence I wrote that I was the greatest writer who'd ever lived. And the prose was like always like super dense. It wasn't like free flowing the way Anthropica is. It was really dense, a lot of adjectives, sort of tightly compacted. And it was kind of miserable a lot of the time to write it. Like I wasn't happy writing. And I had almost forgotten that you could be happy writing. And I think what happened was after doing that for a lot of years, and this goes back to how it was necessary, there was a day where I had this, I remember the day very clearly because I wrote like a very long story in like a single sitting at a time when I could spend a day writing, and if I got half a page, it seemed like a coup. And it felt so different to write this long story, which is called The Oath. It's a story that I eventually published. But I, in that moment, realized I maybe had been doing something wrong for this decade plus in which I was writing this other kind of prose. And that opened something up for me that led to this book's construction. And that had more to do with language than anything else, and realizing I hadn't really been myself on the page for all those years.
I want to talk about how many protagonists there are in this book and the kind of enormity of sort of preparation. Well, from my point of view, to sort of have sympathy and compassion for all those characters. Can you speak a little bit to how that worked, and you know, whether that was, you know, a baked in feature of this book that was sort of significantly difficult? How do you keep all these people in your head?
Well, you know, so the way this book started was because I had been so dejected by the rejections of past books, and because I didn't really want to put myself emotionally on the line again, I sort of wrote the book secretly. And I told myself I was not even writing a book. And I would post little snippets from this book in my, remember when Gmail would have like a little status box? You don't use Gmail, but you could, it was sort of like Twitter, where you could drop like 300 characters into this box. And so the way I wrote this novel for the first like year or two was I would just drop little bits of text into that GChat status box for people I corresponded with often to sort of see, you know, and I was trying to like amuse my friends. And it wasn't until I had like 200 pages or something that I had to admit to myself that I was writing a novel. But in that early GChat portion of the writing process, I was just like making maps of different people, you know, like just a lot of outlines and diagrams of different people who might populate this world I was creating, that for me revolved around the Anthropica Principle, which is the idea that all of human beings exhaust all the Earth's resources every 8 days or something. And all of this is only here because we want it to be. So then I got into this idea of like wanting and creating all these characters who wanted something very badly. You know, Grace Kitchen really wants tenure. Finn Daly really wants to win a national championship on Ultimate Frisbee. You know, Laszlo really wants the world to end. And so that became sort of the denominator that ran through all of these different characters I was creating. But I couldn't even quite tell you like how I chose the cast in the end. You know, it's just something that happened over such a long period. I mean, in some ways I think about your book, The Four Fingers of Death, which also is like a big wild book. And I don't know like at what point you knew what you were doing, but it just sort of like happened organically over time, I think, for me.
My perception is that the character who's most like David Hollander is Grace Kitchen. Is that accurate? So
I think, yeah, I think that's accurate.
That, or is that, and
you're breaking up there,
can
Rick.
you hear me? Are you?
Now I can hear you again. Yeah, you're good now.
I really like, you know, I like the complexity of that. I like the complexity that a character who's a woman in the book is nonetheless the most potently autobiographical character. But in many writing circles these days, that would be considered, you know, biting off a big chunk. And so I'm interested in sort of how you get the essence of these people. How do you get to their sort of inner thing? How does that happen?
I don't know, but I think maybe the David Hollander might be split into Grace Kitchen and Finn Daly. So in some ways, they were the easiest characters for me to get to know because they definitely have elements of me. With the others, you know, one a teacher I had in grad school told me once that she could. This is Mary LaChapelle, really wonderful person. She told me that she could tell the difference between when she was imagining correctly and incorrectly. And I never really knew what that meant until I was trying to work with some of these characters who are not like me. And when I could tell certain days when I was writing that it just wasn't right, you know, that it was too David Hollander-ish. And some of that, I think, just over time, as I sort of, you know, like any writer, just spent more and more time in their heads, I got to know their thought patterns better. And you know that, and you know, also one of the characters is a robot, and even with the robot Fexo, it took some time for me to get to know how Fexo talks and behaves.
So that supposes in a way then that the key to knowing characters is to know voice, to know the language of the character. Is that accurate?
Maybe, although you know what I'm thinking is that no matter whose head I'm in this book, I think there's something about the voice that carries through, you know, that is like, that's me. And honestly, I think that's something I may have absorbed from reading your work, because I feel like that's, I know this event is not about you, but I know that's something that I've often felt in your work, is that you're kind of always there in a way. And I think I wanted it to feel like that, so that my voice and the characters' voices were always interchanging. And one of those two things stayed steady through each chapter, and the other one shifted and changed.
A thing that we share in common I think, developmentally as writers is that we both play music. And I was sort of thinking about, you know, this chapter that you read is a great example, these sort of point of view sections that are really linguistically dazzling, sort of aria-like. And in my own development, I came to feel that a certain sound to the prose really had a lot to do with music and the role that music was playing in my life, you know, on a regular basis. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about playing. I think you still play in bands and stuff, and talk about what that means for what it's meant for you developmentally with respect to language and sort of music in the paragraph.
Yeah, I think there's something I like in music that translates to prose, which is I like dissonance, but I don't like chaos. And so I feel like sometimes the act of writing a sentence, when you think about the fact that if you really unpacked consciousness, you would have to write 10 million pages for every second of experience time. So you're sort of trying to take a little bit of chaos and present it in a way that is receivable, to sort of try to tame that chaos. And I do feel like that is the way I'm trying to play the guitar, where there's a certain amount of like molar aching dissonance in the guitar work that I like, but it never gets to the point where you can't listen to it. And so I think that something about that, but I certainly do think of prose as music, and the sort of swing and the rhythm of the sentences is probably as important to me as anything. You know, and I can read some writers where you could read certain sentences devoid of any surrounding context and just be like, holy shit, right? and you know, how is that happening? It has something to do with the music.
DeLillo.
Yeah, yep. Yeah.
So one thing that's really interesting about this book is that it, you know, it really feels up to the minute, you know, and contemporary, but in fact, it's not. It's like from last year. So what does it feel like to you that it's coming out now in this shit show, this cluster fuckage?
you cut out for a minute, but it was at the perfect time.
Cut out a cluster fuck, right?
Yes.
So what's it feel like to have your book sort of come out now? And do you feel like there's a contextual difference to be located in its appearing in this clusterfuck time?
I know. It's well, the one thing that's interesting about it is, you know, the apocalypse has always seemed really funny to me until it's happening. You know what I mean? And so something about the humor of the book, just by its being released into this moment, doesn't seem so funny anymore. Like, I think there's almost this unintended depth to some of the funnier parts. But then I was also thinking about the fact that, you know, LIE came out soon before 9/11. And so I've released 2 books, both during these times of, you know, global panic. And so I don't know what that means. Maybe I should stop writing books. Clearly, I'm causing mayhem.
Or that's what Laszlo would say. I mean, maybe we should just, anytime you publish a book, everyone should just hunker down, like start collecting canned goods and shit. like when the world should know that when David Hollander has a book coming out, that's like when the prepper thing really settles in, you know?
Yeah, you know, well, as this book was getting closer to publication, you know, and the pandemic hit, and then of course there was all this just national race-related unrest, and I did feel like everyone, it's my fault, you know, the universe is just trying to prevent this book from coming out, and the day of the release, I was telling everyone, watch the sky for asteroids because today's the day. So. But somehow we made it. But yeah, there is something just super weird about the release of it, and you know, like I said at the beginning of this event, this is like being able to put out a second book has been something I've looked forward to for so long, and being able to do an event like this with you. But man, wouldn't it be nice if we could do it in person in front of people? It's like so there's something kind of bittersweet about that part of it, even though I think the timing of the book's release kind of couldn't be better in terms of its themes.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'm going to ask maybe one last question, and then I'm hoping that the audience will ask a few questions. Oh, Joanne Beard's here. Yay.
Yay,
Hi,
Joanne.
I want to ask a little bit about teaching because, you know, I think everybody knows that you have a great reputation as a teacher and that you're a sort of writer's teacher, you know. And I'm interested in what that, I know a little.
Oh, lost you again for a second there. Come back.
I know that one effect that has on your work is that you don't have enough time to work. That's obvious. But is there a way that it, you know, refreshes and creates opportunities for you as a writer? And how does that work? What does teaching do for you compositionally as a writer?
I don't know if this answers the question in compositional terms, but I know that after saying certain things to my students for long enough about the value of innovation, about the importance of language, trying to really encourage risk-taking, I know that it became more and more natural or easy for me to do some of those things on the page that I was always talking about. And there has been an exchange between my writing and my teaching. And that also, I think, is something that encouraged this new kind of prose. When I was talking a little while back about Anthropica being a kind of prose breakthrough for me, I think that came out of things I was admiring in work I was teaching, in my students' work, and realizing that the things I was tending to applaud didn't really look anything like this dense, compacted prose I'd been writing for so long. So I do think there was definitely, yeah, an interplay between those things. And I also learned, honestly, I learned from you the value of just exposing people to things that had the potential to move them, because that's what happened, you know, back in 1993 when I was in your class. Was you were just showing me things that I didn't know existed, as somebody who, you know, I'd read science fiction books and I'd read 19th century novels in you know, college classes. So, you know, when you were showing me Coover and Angela Corder and Barthelme, just all these writers, I was just like, holy shit, this is a thing you can do. And I think I'm always trying to give that feeling to my students, just that moment where the form gets bigger for them and becomes a little more vital. So, yeah. Which is also a way of once again saying thank you.
Well, we don't need to go into this at any length, but I was really happy that Brian said that I had taught at the State University of New York Purchase, because most of the time that's not a thing that goes in the bio, but that was where we met. That campus that was designed to be riot proof.
Yeah, with the little rifle turrets and
the rifle turrets at the top, and the bricks with all the grass growing up between them and everything. It was quite a place. Yeah.
Yep, it's true. Yeah, I was happy Brian said that too. So,
are there any questions out there from you in the audience? I'm seeing a long thread, a very interesting thread, but it's kind of fraggy, and I don't see any questions.
Yes, same. When I open the Q&A box, I just get an empty space there. So everyone is so captivated by our conversation.
Oh, I'm empowered to read how everyone keeps saying "wonderful teacher." Yeah. What's your summer been like, and what is the effect of all of this been on where you are with writing now after this book?
Well, that's now I think I have to figure out um, whether or not I'm sort of still in this game. Because when Anthropica was finished, well, when Katie and Brian took the book, Katie read it and immediately had all these amazing ideas for how to connect a few things that had always been bothering me, that they sort of sat unconnected. And based on her notes, like I dove in and just a couple months wrote like another 100 pages that finished the book. And that was so fun and easy. And I would have thought it'd be very hard after not having written seriously for a long time. Which I'm saying that because I think it gives me hope that maybe I can do it again. But I would say right now I'm in this weird space. Like for the last couple of weeks, all I just fixate on trying to like promote the book, tell people the book is out there, thinking about all the wrong things. So I'm hoping that period will pass and that I'll be inspired again. But I can't really say I have anything major going right now.
And are you teaching already? Has SLC already started?
Oh yeah, big time.
Yeah.
Yes, this was my first real week of teaching, and I feel already just all the way in. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
You too? Yeah, you too. Yeah.
What's the vibe on campus? Is it? Oh, are you all remote or are you actually going in?
Well, we're like hybrid. There are some students on campus, but if you have a class of 15 and there's only 3 of them on campus, you can't really teach that class. So I'm teaching on Zoom, but I'm doing it from my college office. So there's a weird kind of ghost towny feel to it, but so far so good. No one's sick. So yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Katie has disappeared.
Hi, Katie.
Hi. Oh, there's a weird thing behind me. Okay, sorry, TV. You guys have some questions in the Q&A. Do you want me to read them for you?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, pick one for us, Katie.
Oh, this one's good. How do you determine your characters' names, David?
I don't know. I guess I always liked the way Thomas Pynchon's characters would have these weirdo names, but all the names mean something to me. So like Finn, the ultimate player, his name is Finn Daly, and for me, it's funny that Finn has to be Finn every day. He's Finn Daly, which he would very much rather not be, right? So it's an inside joke just for me, And then with Grace Kitchen, her last name is Kitchen because you think of the kitchen as like a space of warmth where maybe the family all comes together. And Grace is like a cold, abrasive person. So all of the names have some kind of a meaning for me. But I don't think I like sat down and thought, oh, what should I name that character? Just at some point that became their name. I don't know.
I think that's a good question because you do tend to name your characters in homage to authors that you love. Like in LIE, you named him after Harlan, and in Anthropica, you named him after Laszlo Krasznahorkai, who we happen to be in contact with now and who is currently reading your book.
Yeah, that is just like, that's too much. That blows me away. But yeah, what Katie's saying is the character in LIE, Harlan Kessler, was named after Harlan Ellison, who had been like the first writer I ever fell in love with as a kid. Yeah, and in this book, Laszlo Katastrofa is named in homage to Laszlo Krasznahorkai, this Hungarian novelist whose work, Rick, I don't know if you know his work well, but it just like lights me up.
I gotta read it.
Yeah, I recommend the novel War and War, which is just the conceit of that book is that every chapter is 1 sentence long. And it's just, and he's so good at that particular thing that not everyone is so good at, but yeah.
I would suggest Melancholy of Resistance, but
that one's good too.
Yeah. This is a really good one, and it's from 2 former enemies of fiction, which if you went to Sarah Lawrence, you'll know what it is. What are you reading now, and where are you finding energy in your work?
Rick, what are you reading now?
Well, I spent the summer reading the Aeneid, which I had never read, and it was a really transformative experience, and I really loved it. I also read a speculative fiction by N.K. Jemisin called The Fifth Season, which a lot of people read. I had not read it, and I thought it was a really tremendous, vital, beautiful book. So those are two
great.
things I've read. Yeah, I also read, what's the graphic novel that was just, The Watchmen. I just read The Watchmen finally, which also.
Yeah, finally. That's been a long time coming.
So.
Yeah, I read a lot of good books over the summer. Some of them recommended to me by Katie. I read this young novelist's first book, N.J. Campbell, which is called Found Audio. This really slim book that has like a Calvino-like bigness to it, despite being, very, very small, 150-page book. Right now I'm reading the book by the person, if anybody in the audience has seen my YouTube book trailer, the narrator for that trailer who has this perfect radio man's voice, Aaron Poochigan. I'm reading his novel in verse right now, which is called Mr. Either Or, which is a exciting sort of form-breaking book. But yeah, I was lucky this summer. I actually read a lot of books. I also read the manuscript of a former, when Katie says there are enemies in the audience, I teach this class called The Enemies of Fiction, which is, a sort of play on the enemies of the novel from John Hawkes. Bingo, yes. So one of my enemies, this guy David Miller, who may or may not be here today, I read his manuscript over the summer, which was probably, honestly, better than any published book I read this summer. So if you're out there, David, well done. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you 2 more questions. But before I do, David, can you just pick 2 numbers between 1 and 99?
Sure, 17 and 42.
You know 17 is my lucky number, right?
I do, yes. Of course I know that.
Would you say 17 and 42?
Yes.
Brian, give me a thumbs up or whatever in the chat if you got that. 17 and 42. Well, because 42 is the answer to everything, right? Is that why you're doing it? Okay, great. Anthony asks, his copy has not arrived yet, but when it comes, what will he find most upsetting about it? I like that question.
Well, I don't know. Do we know who does Anthony have a last name? Is this somebody I know? Because if I know them, I might know the answer.
Kolkla? I'm sorry if I didn't say it.
Yes, I know. Kolkla, yes. Okay. Anto, he goes by. Hi, Anto. What will you find most upsetting? The fact that you did not write it first.
This is from Yonina. Hi, Yonina.
Hi, Yonina.
Do you think Lori Moore will sue you?
She probably already has, but my lawsuits all run through Katie. So Katie's an expert at dealing with the litigious part of my writing career. So yes.
That's true. Well, okay. One more good question. How does your musical life affect your writing, and vice versa?
Oh, well, we talked a little bit about that. Yeah, Rick asked me about that.
I want the credit for the ones I did actually ask.
That's a good one. To use the 5 or so aforementioned unpublished novels and LIE as a spectrum, where would you place Anthropica chronologically and as it pertains to your own evolution in style and form? Whew, that's a long one.
Chronologically, it's the most recent. It's the last thing of substance I have written. And also in terms of style, it's the only one, aside from this collection of stories I have, that I think represents the way I write and think about writing now. Still, it would be nice if all those other books had been published, because then there'd be this feeling of footprints that led me from point A to point B. Now instead there's just, these 2 locations without any, it's actually quite strange. Although Seth Katz, who maybe is here, he's read both of my books. He may be the only one. And he said that he sees real similarities between them. I don't see them, but I believe him when he says that.
Did you just say he's the only one that has read both of your books?
Well, I was being self-deprecating, Katie. Don't start trouble.
That's lame. Okay. Two more. What works would you most love Anthropica to appear beside on a course syllabus?
On a course syllabus?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good one. Well, I got to pick one of Rick's books, and I think I'm gonna pick what I believe is his most recent novel, Hotels of North America, because that was a book that just made me so excited for a lot of reasons that I would need more time to talk about. And then the other book I might want on that shelf would maybe be Laszlo's War and War. Yeah.
I thought you might say that.
Yeah.
This last one from John, I think, is a good one. What do you think motivated your interest in free will versus determinism? And do you have any particular agenda that the issue might be related to?
Well, my path to fiction was super weird. Like when I took this class with Rick, I was definitely going to pursue, my plan was to pursue a PhD in philosophy. That's what I thought I was going to do after college. And so some of these ideas that I got interested in when I was reading a lot of philosophy just sort of stuck with me with my fiction. And I had read this book a long time ago by this guy. This is so boring, but a book by this guy Daniel Dennett called Elbow Room: Free Will, the varieties of free will worth wanting. And what the book was kind of about was the fact that, well, yeah, of course, there's no such thing as free will if seen from this very weird vantage point that doesn't really help any of us in thinking about free will. In another way, of course, there is free will. Look at all the language we've built around free will. And so that, I think that the idea that whether or not you're free depends entirely on where you're asking the question from is really interesting to me, as most things are, because I think that you could tell often completely opposite narratives about a single idea and have them both be true. Or something like that.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, well, we're wrapping up here, and I certainly want to get to the raffle as promised, which you didn't have to buy a ticket for. You were all entered by coming, and we have a couple of good things to raffle off. But I just want to say thank you to you both. First of all, thank you, Rick, for moderating this conversation. Here's Brian. And I also wish we could be in person. I think there are a lot of very robot themed things that we're missing out on tonight that we could have done. I also want to say that, I couldn't go this night without saying something sentimental. And, David, I mean, you're the reason that I write. Like, you're the first teacher to ever believe in me. And when I read Anthropica, I felt seen and I felt understood. And I can't believe we're sitting here 5 years later after I hounded you for 2 years to let me read it. And now we're publishing it, which is pretty cool. It's all very surreal. So
that is pretty cool, yeah.
Yeah, so I want to just thank you for being my teacher and for writing the book. It's amazing, and it's been an amazing experience, and it was awesome to get to edit it and to work on it with you.
I'm just so happy that so many people who I think have sort of supported me and believed in my work for all these years. And by that, I mostly mean, students, former students, that I'm able to sort of hold this book in my hands, and in some ways, for me, it feels like it shows that their belief, was well-founded, that they were not foolish to to believe in me, and that just means a lot. And you and Brian know that I love you guys, so I'll go back into robot mode now.
Fair enough. Yeah, let's start talking in binary again, and then we'll.
Oh, that's perfect, David, because we were talking in the comments about how among all of the love and gratitude that we poured onto you, we were talking about which characters were you, and we decided that they all were, and I decided that Fexo is your id.
I love that. It's like that old science fiction movie, Forbidden Planet, where anyway, this like evil doctor he's not evil, he's just really smart, and he doesn't know that his id is creating this monster that's like killing everyone on this planet. It actually is the movie that introduced Robbie the robot to the world. Anyway, this is.
No, it's perfect because your id is just, your basic instinct is to just try to be a real human.
It's also a good segue into what we're raffling off tonight, which if many of you don't know who Fexo is, you will once you read this book. We're also in a very intense legal battle with Fexo right now over authorship of this novel. I assure you that David did write it and not Fexo, but I'm sure Fexo will have something to say later on this evening. However, we do have something from Fexo to raffle off because he was very insistent, and as part of this legal battle, we have to. So David picked two numbers, 17 and 42. Brian, who is 17?
Okay, so if anyone did their own counting or something, don't blame me if I got it wrong, because it's a very difficult thing to scroll, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. These are the winners regardless. They're not getting retracted. And so, okay, so 17 is Carolyn Farrell. So, raise your hand in the comments or something.
So Carolyn wins the...
she said, whoa.
So Carolyn, you actually win the surprise from Fexo because 17 is my lucky number, and I decided that Fexo's prize is going with 17. Yeah, you won. There you go. So you're going to have to email. I'm going to drop my email address in the chat, and I will send it to you.
Carolyn, wait until you see what it is.
We'll just say Fexo wrote it. That's all anybody needs to know. And then, okay, Brian, who's the second person? 42.
Okay, so 42 is Jane Glucksman.
So Jane, you've won a copy of the book signed by David from Powerhouse, and we're going to get that to you. I'm going to put my email in the chat. And if you all email me.
Hopefully she knows that there is a chat.
It's Katie at Animal Riot Press.
She does. There she is.
well done, Jane.
Okay, yeah. Jane, please email me and we'll get your address and get you a book. I just want to also say thank you to Powerhouse Arena for hosting us tonight. This was lovely. Thank you, Chris, so much for all of your work to make this happen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, for emceeing, and David and Rick for just, being you. Everything this evening.
Hold on, Percy, come here for a second.
Oh, here we go.
This is my 13-year-old kid who wanted to say hi during this event. So they just knocked and said, "Can I say hi?" And I shook my head no. And then as they were leaving, I felt really bad about it. So
Percy, there are 99 people looking at you right now.
Hello, 99 people.
That's
Percy, what do you have to say about your dad's book?
Say that again?
So what do you have to say about your dad's book?
I'm going to read it, hopefully. He says I won't understand any of it, but I'm going to read it.
I think you will.
I didn't say that.
I think you absolutely will. And I think you'll just nod your head and see how mad your father is.
Yeah.
Thank you all for being here. I'm going to pass it over to Chris now. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much. This is excellent. Thank you so much to David and Rick and Brian and Katie and everybody who asked questions and participated in the chat. Looking forward to hearing what Laszlo thinks about the book. And if you missed the event for any reason, we'll have it on YouTube soon. And please buy the book if you didn't win the raffle, and through the link on the event page, and to get a free book plate. And support Powerhouse and Animal Riot and David. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone. And Rick, thank you again. I'll be in touch with you soon.
Yeah, let's chat. I want to talk.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, everyone.
everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.